Good morning, Tri-Counties. I'm Mary Harmon, and I'm your 2020 Tri-Counties President. I would like to welcome all of you to our first virtual general membership meeting. Thank you for allowing us to come into your homes. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. This is a very challenging time for all of us, and Tri-Counties is working to provide some continuity within the constraints of our current stay-at-home order. Together, we'll get through this. We keep important COVID-19 updates on our website. We've been offering webinars for our classes, our committee meetings, and our events. The Young Professionals Network, YPN, had a quarantini event that went really well. They'll be holding another one very soon. Watch for the invite. Last week, we started curbside pickup for any Realtor store items you may need. And you can also find the education calendar and resources on our website at www.tricorealtors.com. Please take advantage of all the valuable information that is being provided. Laura Halverson, our AE, makes every effort to keep the information up to date to help us stay informed with current information. Kudos to Laura. Thank you. This coming Monday, April 20th, from 11 to 12 p.m., we will host a webinar that you do not want to miss. We will have a current economic forecast from CAR's Jordan Levine, and CAR's Gov Hutchinson will talk to us about the COVID-19 forms. The forms that have recently been released. We will be ready to answer all your questions. A couple more items. Applications to apply to be on the Board of Directors went out this past Monday. If you are interested in applying, please submit your application by Friday, April 24th by 5 p.m. Additionally, let's do our part to support our communities and support our local restaurants. Lucille's in Chino Hills is taking orders, and if you order $30 or more, you will get $10 off your order. Use the code 177-938-191. But if you're really hungry and spend $100 or more, you can get $25 off your order using code 140-733-660. Realtors making a difference because that's who we are. For today's webinar, we will start with a presentation from NAR's Dr. Jessica Lowe. She is the Vice President of Demographics and Behavioral Insights. Then we will hear from our legal counsel, John Giardinelli, and we will finish up with our government affairs directors, Christine Schachter and Tim Shaw. Any questions, please type them in for Laura. She'll field them and she will present them to the speakers. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have as our special guest, Dr. Jessica Lowe. She is Vice President of Demographics and Behavioral Insights for the National Association of Realtors. The core of her research focuses on analyzing demographic trends for both NAR members and housing consumers through management and predictive analytics, surveys, focus groups, and data analysis. She presents new and innovative ways to showcase results. Dr. Lautz discusses research findings in major media outlets and international presentations. Dr. Lautz received her doctorate of real estate from Nottingham Trent University in the UK. She also has a master's in public policy from American University and undergraduate degrees in political science and law and justice from Central Washington University. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you Dr. Jessica Loutz.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Laura, for having me here as well. Very much appreciate joining the webinar today. With all that education, I have a lot of student loan debt, so like probably many of you, I'm trying to chalk away at that and definitely taking advantage of no interest rates right now on that student loan debt, so appreciating that from the CARES Act. Or perhaps it was the first stimulus package. Regardless, I'm appreciating that. I will say what I am going to talk about is essentially our forecast. We don't have it in stone. We are in a moment of a lot of uncertainty right now for a lot of families out there, for your clients, for yourselves, and for the real estate market. We have been doing a weekly survey for the last 6 weeks. We just released the latest iteration this morning. It's a flash survey. We're doing it very quickly. And we're trying to put out very timely results on what different markets are facing right now. The first iteration of the survey, we did oversamples and we looked specifically at the nationwide at whole, but then we also looked at California and we looked at Washington State. And as soon as we published the results, we were completely outdated because we should have oversampled New York. So we learned our lesson there. We moved forward with that survey and we started breaking out areas where there's presumed or confirmed cases of COVID-19. And then we found that we were outdated again. So we now have a survey that just covers the US as a whole. It might not necessarily be completely reflective of your market, but I know that CAR is also doing a lot of research on this topic and we've been comparing results. So I'm really glad to hear that they're going to be talking to you guys as well. For the results that we are getting back and we just released this morning, what we're finding is that among our members, 6 in 10 are saying that clients are taking a pause right now. So they're not moving forward with their transaction at this time on the buying and selling side. It's hard to go through that transaction at this point, perhaps given their own healthcare or their economic situation, and so they're pausing that transaction. The optimistic side of that, though, is that we do ask in that question, are you stopping your transaction altogether? Are you taking a pause in the transaction? And 6 in 10 were saying a pause. Only 10% are actually saying that they're stopping their transaction altogether. So perhaps someone had a job loss in their family, or a healthcare situation where they just don't feel comfortable moving forward with a transaction. What we also know going into this situation is that we've had extremely limited inventory for a very long period of time. So we've had 96 months of year-over-year price growth. And with that, it's been very hard for a lot of home buyers to enter the market. First-time home buyers especially have had a very difficult time. I will say that when we look at home prices moving forward, what we do believe will happen is that home prices will stay stable, if not increase, because of the limited inventory. Because what we have found from the latest survey is that inventory numbers are dropping even further. People are taking their homes off the market during this time period. There are buyers and sellers who do need to enter the market right now. So perhaps they're in a situation where there is a job change, or there's a marriage or a divorce, and they're in a situation where they actually do need a new home. And based on that demand, we expect to see that prices will increase as people compete for that very limited inventory. What we also know is that while homes are on the market, there's a lot of creativity that's happening right now. So our members are using technology in new and different ways that they haven't before necessarily, and really upping their game when it comes to technology. So making sure that the home virtual tours are available, virtual listing appointments, virtual open houses. So that seems like a Zoom party that you probably want to go to. I think that there's a lot of creativity that's happening in this process. If areas allow, and sometimes this is not possible, but if areas allow e-signatures and e-closings, we do find that members are taking on those types of technologies as well. What we have found is that if sellers are keeping their home listed on the market, and there are some who are doing so, that they're making sure that when buyers do come into their home, that all of the buyers are washing their hands, wearing footies, removing their shoes, making sure that they're wearing gloves. Often we have found that our members are saying that they're doing pre-inspections of the homes itself, so that if you're having this home and it's only showed virtually, or you're quickly bringing a buyer into the home, you're making sure that the home inspection report is there beforehand, so that it can alleviate any concerns that that buyer could have. We're also finding that agents are coming into the home, they are completely washing down and scrubbing that home after the seller leaves that house to bring the buyer in, and then washing that house again. So really acting full service agent there. That is quite a bit of work that our members are taking on. We have also found that buyers who are out there right now are very motivated. The data that we released this morning, it actually shows that if a member had a buyer who put a contract on a home, they're actually seeing about a third of the homes that they traditionally do. So traditionally, a buyer, when they go into the market, in a healthy pre-COVID market, traditionally they'd see about a dozen homes, 9 in the last year before they put a contract on it. So there's limited inventory. They're going through the homes in their price range. They're finding a place that's within their commute time. They're putting the contract on. Often bidding wars, but sometimes you can actually get that contract accepted. In the last iteration of this survey, we actually found that buyers are looking at only 3 homes before they're putting a contract onto that home and it's accepted. So a third of the number of homes that they have traditionally seen in the last year. I think this is a really interesting transition. One, it both speaks to limited inventory on the market, but it also speaks to how motivated these buyers are when they go into this buying market, that they're being very strategic. They're looking at the homes that are in their price range, and almost like HGTV, they're finding that home within 3. It never happened before. And I know that we got lots of entertainment and perhaps eye rolls at the idea that you could just look at 3 homes and put a contract on it. So I do think that this is an interesting transition now. The other thing that we are seeing is that a quarter of our members who did have a contract that they had accepted from a buyer in their home in the last week, a quarter of them actually said that that buyer never saw that home in person. So they only viewed the home virtually before putting that contract on that home. In comparison, this is not an apples to apples comparison, but buyers in the last year, so pre-COVID, from our profile home buyers and sellers, only 3.5% actually did that. So I think that this is a fascinating trend that we are seeing here. Seeing if there's any questions that are coming into the chat box at this point. Nothing? Okay, all right, I'll keep rambling. So from this survey as well, we are collecting data on the difficulty in tenants paying rent. So we do know that many of our members are property landlords, but they're also property managers. So we are seeing that some tenants are having difficulties paying rents. They're, of course, are trying to work with their tenants in this. We are seeing that if they're a property manager, they're actually having an easier time being able to work with their tenant and being able to accommodate them if they're having difficulty paying rent right now. So we are seeing this in our data as well. So we released that this morning. We also released a weekly monitor. And so every Thursday morning, we're putting out essentially a compilation of research that we've done in the last week. We know that lending has become substantially tighter in the last week. JP Morgan Chase is one of the banks who is out there saying you now need a 20% down payment and you need more than a 700 credit score to be able to purchase a home. And that would be very, very difficult for a buyer to do. So that was as of 2 days ago, Tuesday. We put out a down payment report. We had actually already planned on putting that out, but the timing worked out pretty well to be able to put out this report this morning. We know that buyers don't have that. Your typical down payment was just 6% last year for your first-time home buyers. And we've collected data back to 1989, and we know that the down payment has never been a median of 20% for either repeat buyers or for first-time home buyers in the market. So this is a very stringent lending in comparison to what we have seen in recent years. And that could very much tighten the market. We do expect that moving forward, we likely coming out of this, given the stock market fluctuations that we have seen, the volatility that we've seen in the last few weeks, that it's very likely that we will see investors come back into the market, much like they did after the Great Recession, maybe diversifying their assets in comparison to just putting that in the stock market, which they may have been doing in the last few years. We also expect that international buying activity may decline, as well as vacation activity. We know that many Americans right now are not considering, of course, you can't travel internationally. Many international buyers are, they do travel to the US before they make that property purchase. And the largest population that has been purchasing in the US is from China. So we do expect that those buyers will decline in the next few years, or in the next year. We're not forecasting few years out. We do also expect that there could be some changes moving forward. So as this demand does open up, and we do see that there's either a vaccine or social distancing as not as stringent as it currently is in many states, that we will see that that spigot is really opened for buyers because that demand is there. And we do expect that buyers may change their buying preferences. So there's been a lot of talk right now about a baby boom 9 months from now. Very well could see that. Start could be coming along, and a lot of people may need to buy a house as we're in forced cocooning, and they may need an extra bedroom. Who knows? I think that you're probably going to see some demand changes. So the resurgence of the home office is likely something that's going to be important to a lot of people. The idea of green space and having some place perhaps to plant their own kale and their lettuce because you can't get that from the store and you can't get an Instacart delivery. At least I can't in Virginia. So I suspect that there could be that changing demand. One thing that we've seen consistently over a number of years is the growth in multi-generational homes, especially for some demographics and in some areas of the country. It's very popular to live with grandparents and with adult children, all sharing in cost savings. And I think that that is a change that's likely going to stem out of this. A lot of young adults who are living in city centers independently right now have actually transitioned to moving back to their family home so that they can all quarantine together. Their families have a better stock, I guess, in their kitchen than perhaps they have in their own apartments. And the idea of the high-rise elevator and such has been a detractor for many young adults. Any questions so far?
We have one, but I'm not sure. It's a little off topic, I guess.
Okay.
And I'm not sure really who can answer this. So anyone can, hop in if you guys need to answer this. But how can listing agents make certain buyers are able to qualify in this current market with lenders tightening guidelines? Is it true it's a RESPA violation for a listing agent to ask buyer's agent to have buyers cross-qualified? I read something about the CFPB and RESPA enforcement if listing agent asks for this.
I do not have the answer to that question. I'm not sure if anyone else does.
Do you have any insight, John?
Yeah, I'm not aware that cross qualifying would be a violation of RESPA. We've done a number of RESPA issues, both with the feds and with the Department of Real Estate. So long as you're not steering someone for some type of financial gain, and so long as you're not mandating the use of a particular service, particularly if you have a financial interest in that service, you should be okay. It's perfectly okay, for example, to require, and Frank today probably recommended that all buyers be pre-qualified somewhere. And if you want to make them pre-qualified with a lender of your choice, that's probably okay, so long as you're not requiring that they A, use that particular lender, and B, you're not getting any financial gain under the table or otherwise. So,
I have a question, if I may, for Dr. Lautz. You had mentioned that a quarter of the purchases were being done virtually. Can you tell us what part of the country was that in, or did you see it all over?
So we collected that data point all over. So it's a quarter of members who had a contract in the last week did say that they had at least one client who had put down a contract that was virtual. So they could have had multiple clients and more of them could have put down a contract after seeing the home in person. But at least that speaks to an overwhelming trend in comparison to just 3% of buyers last year doing the same thing. So I do think it's a fascinating trend. Realtor.com actually this morning put out research, and it had actually a really similar headline. It said that they had done a survey and it indicated that a quarter of younger buyers would be interested in purchasing a home sight unseen. So only touring that home virtually as well.
Thank you. And the next question, we can save it for when John speaks. I'd just like to know what kind of liability it exposes the realtor to when they sell a house virtually. But
Yeah,
we
you
can
know,
say,
I was
yeah, yes, I'm sorry.
I will be covering liability issues for sure.
perfect.
I just want to hear what Dr. Lautz has to say. She's doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you. I was actually, I did a very similar presentation yesterday to realtors in West Virginia, I believe, and they asked the same liability question. California laws could be different, but it was my understanding talking to our attorneys, I just quickly chatted them and they said that the same liability would stand because you could have the home inspection and the appraisal throughout the process as well, if within that state that people were allowed in the home. But John, of course, will have better answers than I provided there, I'm sure, to that question. One of the things that I want to make sure to mention and not forget to mention is that we do have Right Tools right now. It is a product that was there about a decade ago during the Great Recession and was brought back just recently for members through NAR. What it is that Right Tools right now, you can actually have free publications, free courses. We know that this is a time really to sharpen our saws, take advantage of education that is out there. You can take free ePro classes, which again, if all of this technology is becoming so important right now, why not take the free ePro classes? They also have free telemed, which has been expanded for, I believe, the next month for realtors as well. So if you don't have insurance, you want to take advantage of telemed, please do that and sign up on Right Tools right now. And I know the products are changing frequently. So please check it out and see what's available that you can use.
I have a question for you, Dr. Lautz. It seems like part of the survey is from the entry-level buyers. What percentage of the survey is coming from the luxury market?
Great question. So this survey is actually from the realtor perspective. So we surveyed over 100,000 realtors, and we're doing so on a weekly basis. And we're getting back approximately, it depends. Last weekend, I will say that we surveyed and it was Easter, it was Passover. You're not going to get a huge response on either one of those holidays. So we have been getting back 6,000 responses typically on this survey. It gives our margin of error very small, so it's plus or minus 1%. Last week we did have a smaller response rate, of course, for the holidays. That being said, I think there's a range of members who are taking this survey. Now, if you have a dozen kids who are running around your feet and you're trying to cook them dinner, you're probably not going to be taking this survey. And if you're have a bunch of clients, you're not going to be taking this survey. But if you are right in the middle, your typical agent out there, you probably are taking this survey. So that's what I would say about the survey error that we have on both ends of that transaction.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on the research that we are putting together? All right, that's really all I have for prepared remarks, but I'm happy to hang around, and if there's any questions that come in, I'm happy to answer anything else. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lautz. That was really informative. Next up, we are going to hear from our government affairs team, Christine Schachter and Tim Shaw.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you. I used to feel decent about myself. Then I heard Jessica's introduction and realized my resume is pretty lousy. So it's great to share the panel with you, Jessica. She mentioned the NAR Right Tools Right Now initiative, and I was going to point out, if you go there too, there'll be certain categories you can click on. The Coronavirus Advocacy FAQ, you can learn about our efforts at the national level to advocate for our industry and making sure real estate is seen as an essential service. Coronavirus Mortgage and Personal Finance FAQ. Also, Coronavirus SBA CARES Act, information on the Small Business Administration programs. And then Coronavirus Pandemic Unemployment Assistance FAQ. That'll be, I know, of interest to a lot of us right now as well. So a lot of good information there at NAR's website. At the state level, Governor Newsom, of course, like all 50 states, have declared a state of emergency. And under the law, when under a state of emergency, the governor does have fairly broad powers. Governor Newsom has issued a couple executive orders under this emergency related to real estate specifically. So one executive order on March 27th related to tenants, those who were renting their home. And the tenant does have some obligation here. If the tenant is not going to be able to make their rent payment, a partial payment or just no payment at all, the tenant is being asked to retain documentation about what their impact was and why they're not paying rent. And they have they have to inform their landlord within 7 days in writing from the time the rent is due. They have that 7 days in writing to tell their landlord that they're not going to be paying that rent in full that month. For those who own their home, there's going to be a 90-day grace period for mortgage payments, a forbearance period of 90 days, and there will be no negative credit impacts from taking advantage of that. And in that period of time, that 90 days, there will be a moratorium on initiating foreclosure proceedings under this second executive order. And there will as well be a relief from any fees or interest or charges related to that. So that's some of the relief, if you will, the governor is giving tenants and those who are having financial trouble because of the pandemic. Governor Newsom did hold a press conference here just recently, talking about when the state might lift the lockdown order. And basically he was looking at having the state meet a three-part criteria to be able to test for COVID-19, trace, what is it?
Surveil, so make sure that how it's progressing in the population.
How it's spreading. So test, trace, and then treat, being able to have the hospital and other capacity to treat. So he's saying once those three are met, he will lift the order. And now he did not give any timeline, and that's obviously frustrating to all of us because we don't have a date on the calendar when we know this is going to be lifted. But he says once they feel satisfied that they can test, trace, and treat, that he will lift it.
Tim, I have a question.
Okay.
How does the ordinance affect commercial tenants or properties?
The state ordinance, that is, you mean?
Yeah, the one that you guys were just talking about.
Relative to eviction moratoriums?
I suppose.
It covers everything
I believe it applies there equally as well,
tenants,
right?
yeah,
across the board. Yeah.
Okay.
And John will get in a little bit more to that landlord-tenant relationship. We've received a lot across the board relative to residential, commercial, and John, with his own experience, can touch on the commercial. Some of the programs at the federal level that have passed through the state deal with the small business programs, and so that's a way to try to incentivize those small business to stay intact, essentially, within their lease provisions. So we'll touch on that a little bit.
Okay.
One thing as well, the LA County government took it a step further. So in their assistance program passed, and this applies to all 88 incorporated cities as well as the unincorporated parts of Los Angeles County. They mirrored some of the language from the state that there cannot be any evictions for inability to pay and no late fees or interest. But they did also specify that the renter will have 12 months to repay the missed rent. So they did put a time period of a whole year in there for the renter. And they also, believe it or not, changed the restrictions on, a tenant could add additional occupants or even pets into their property without any penalties. So they're kind of rewriting the terms of that landlord-tenant relationship, that contract a little bit, to say there can now be additional occupants and even pets in the LA County area. So that was a kind of interesting twist on things. So that's what's happening at the local level.
And I'll touch a little bit on the finances here relative to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It's the CARES Act. You're going to hear a lot about that. Some key provisions of that were, one, the pandemic unemployment assistance, and that's really where realtors benefit as independent contractors, small business owners. There is the Paycheck Protection Program loan. That's primarily for brokers if you're going to be covering employees. Economic Injury Disaster Loans, EIDL. The Small Business Administration Express Bridge Loan. And you can get more information on tricorealtors.com. Again, tricorealtors.com. If you ever have any questions, you can always call our office at 909-594-5992. And we are taking questions there. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. It's good to note that that the Department of Labor or Economic Development Department within the state of California did issue a notice or a letter just within the last couple of days that it should be about 2 more weeks before that program is up and running. This was an entirely new program issued through the federal government to the states. So it's something that's had to be rolled out, but this is applicable to independent contractors with paid leave benefits, an additional $600 per week for up to 4 months. And so you'll want to monitor that, and you want to keep updated at carcoronavirusupdates.com. That's .org. carcovidupdates.org is another site to turn to for that. John will touch on some of these new forms, and as mentioned, tomorrow CAR is having a webinar on some changes being made to the forms. John will get into that. Again, just to clarify, carcovidupdates.org is a great resource as well. And as mentioned, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, there will be more coming out, so stay tuned for that so that you have more to turn to.
Tim, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
They want you to repeat how the state is planning to test or determine how all California residents are free of COVID virus to determine when to lift the stay at home. I guess that's what Newsom mentioned yesterday, right?
He did. I don't know that it means all Californians will have been tested, but I mean, I think the governor's point was he wants to feel comfortable that they have the testing capacity to test anyone who is maybe suspected of having been exposed or demonstrating any symptoms, so that there's just the testing capacity to make sure, the state is identifying those who have the virus. I don't know if he exactly quantified it. I listened to most of the press conference. I don't think he exactly quantified what that is, but just feeling comfortable that the state has that capacity to meet the demand that they expect. I do want to say too, I can't take any credit. Christine did a fantastic job in putting together this COVID-19 resource guide for realtors. So we've made that available. So, you'll get information at the national, state, and local level. It's kind of a one-stop shop place where you can go to find out how to conduct real estate during this emergency. So kudos to Christine for putting that together.
Thank you. And one item related to LA County's new order, they revised their order through May 15th. And you want it at your place of business. This applies to any city, any unincorporated area, because real estate is an essential business. Post social distancing protocols. It's a 3-page memo checklist that you need to post on site and also disperse to your agents out in the field. Again, that is on site at your business and out in the field. You'll see it at stores. You'll see it out in the community when you go do your errands, but that is necessary, and per the ordinance passed, that you'll need to post that. And it's basically a disclosure that you're following all CDC guidelines, social distancing, the 6 feet apart, that you're making sure you're sanitizing everything. And so that's an attachment to the recent order, and we will have that up for you shortly.
Great. Do you guys have anything else?
That's it for us.
I think, and John will touch on property showings. Again, no open houses. You are allowed to show properties, but you must do so with, again, only the most interested buyers or qualified buyers. And he'll touch on that based on some of the questions as to qualifications and how to do property on-site visits with those declarations.
I have a question. This is for Tim and Christine. That 90-day grace period for mortgages? Is that an automatic, or do the borrowers have to contact their lenders, their loss mitigation department?
You'll need to contact your mortgage provider. It's the same thing as if you were a tenant. You still have to give notice of your intent not to pay. So you still need to reach out to your lender. The governor had about 200 plus banks that he had included or worked with, but you do want to talk to your provider, mortgage provider, to make sure that they understand what's going on.
Great.
It's not a given.
Well, and then you'll also have the opportunity to talk about how you're going to pay the money back.
Right.
Okay.
And that's a great point, that this isn't a forgiveness. This money's still going to be owed. And so if you can pay your mortgage, you should pay your mortgage. There's no reason not to pay, because you're going to just be digging yourself a hole. The other thing is, as I understand it, at least in talking to some bankers that I've been dealing with, that you're going to have to establish that the reason you're not paying is related in some way to the pandemic. You've either been laid off, had your hours cut back, had to stay home because you have a child care issue. Otherwise, there's a possibility, as I understand it, that some banks may actually ding your credit. I'm not sure, but that's something that you need to talk to your bank about very specifically. Don't play games. That's the one thing when I get started, I'm going to start out with: don't play games.
Well,
So,
and your payments also have to have been current prior to the pandemic. And that's why I can't stress enough that they need to communicate with their lender, because every lender may have a different program in how you're going to pay it back. It's not an automatic forbearance,
that's correct.
and it's not an automatic that they're going to do it.
So I have a couple of questions, and I think these questions are really gonna be for John. It's a lot about, the tenants and landlords. But here's one. Is there any incentive for people who can pay on time, like give them some credit for their credit score? Question. And from my understanding, California does not take an e-signature. Do you think that this would be a good time to have e-signature legalized in California?
Let me answer those two questions, unless somebody else wants to take a stab at it. I've talked to a lot of property managers in the boards that I represent, including yours, who are, yes, they're offering incentives. I don't know about credit scores, because frankly, I'm not sure how a landlord has any control over that in terms of the credit companies themselves. But I know landlords are offering minor, for people that are having a hard time, they're offering discounts and, things of that nature. In other words, you pay your rent on time, I'll give you a small discount, or something along those lines. So yeah, there's nothing to prevent you from doing that. Just be very, very careful, because number one, you want to make sure that it's clear that these are temporary and not affecting long-term rent, because then you get involved with rent control issues. What was the other question?
We talked about the e-notary
The
on
e-notary thing, yeah.
our CAR call with all the GADs in the state. We were told that the Secretary of State is not supportive of that idea. I think there's concern there could be out-of-state notaries coming into our market, and so he's sort of been opposed. I think when it came up before at CAR before the pandemic, we seemed to have a split opinion at CAR. I don't know if I was in that committee meeting, but so I didn't hear this. But my understanding was there was sort of a split within CAR, but with the pandemic, we're probably more inclined to like the idea of having e-notary nowadays, obviously. But so far, it's not been a change at the state level. The Secretary of State kind of pushing back on that idea, and so far, the governor has not allowed it under his executive
And that
orders.
would be for an emergency basis. Now, bills could still be introduced going forward, but it's important to note the legislature is not in session. We did get some emails related to bills that have been altered and talking about rent adjustments and the like, but the legislature, the only purpose for them reconvening constitutionally would be to pass the budget. So if they're going to pass a bill, it would likely be part of that budget as part of the May going into June deadline. But we don't see any bills really going forward unless it were on an emergency basis. John can speak to out-of-state e-notaries. I think there was to clarify, e-signatures can be done through zip forms, but I think you're talking about e-notaries.
That's correct. That's what I understood the question to be. In terms of e-signatures, frankly, it's what we're doing. People are using DocuSign or whatever program is available in the state that you're in more than ever. I'm a member of a discussion group that Katie Johnson set up at NAR, and it's phenomenal to see what's going on all over the country. We're a little behind the curve, I think, on notary issues, but a lot of people are using out-of-state notaries, which is valid under the law. I got an email yesterday from the person in our law firm that does estate planning, and of course, estate planning documents oftentimes have to be notarized. And there are notaries in California, and I'm not going to go into, because they're probably, it's questionable whether they should be doing it, but there are notaries that will do it for an advance fee, and they're setting it up in a manner that allows them to do it. But most of the people that I know are using out-of-state notaries because, again, while that's valid, California notaries are pretty much been limited. I don't know why, but that seems to be the case here in California.
Okay, I have another question. Regarding tenants adding occupants and pets, would that be a permanent tenant or pet, or is it only during the stay order?
Well, go ahead, Christine. Always want to hear from you.
You know, I mean, they're allowing tenants forgiveness for 12 months. I think it's going to be.
Christine, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's going to be for a long time. I mean, we'd have to look more specifically at what they put, but again, this is really looking at a 12-month horizon. Keep in mind too, that it's not necessarily exactly tied, but LA County has since released within the last couple of weeks, 1/3 of their inmate population. These folks don't have jobs to go back to. They don't have school to be in. And they're going to be needing to reside somewhere. So that doesn't make anyone feel better. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't know that the LA County is going to go back on that allowance. That may be something that's going to be here for a while to stay. And John can speak to the courts not being open. So good luck with trying to run the situation.
On the dogs and the pets and all that, keep in mind again that nothing has changed relative to service animals and companion animals. They're not pets under California law. Fair housing laws make that very clear. I think Christine hit on the $1 million question, which is the post-COVID residual issues. Who knows what the legislature is going to do relative to actual pets. Remember, keeping in mind that pets do not include companion animals and service animals. Those are under separate categories of the fair housing regulations. So I suspect that we'll see the legislature digging in their heels on a lot of things that they've wanted to do for a long period of time and just leaving them as the status quo going forward. But I'll talk about a little bit of that when I get into my presentation.
Okay, I have one more question. And this is the tenant ordinance that was signed by the governor March 27th. How does it affect commercial tenants?
As far as I know, all of the ordinances affect both residential, multi-tenant, 5 or more, and commercial. So if we're talking about the eviction stay, that applies across the board. And frankly, it wouldn't matter anyway, because as Christine just pointed out, the courts aren't processing those kinds of cases anyway. So, but as far as I know, Christine and Tim, the ordinances and the governor's order have all been across the board as it applies to both commercial and residential.
Correct. That's as how we understand it.
Is there anything else, Christine or Tim, that you guys want to add?
I think you saw a question about the tax portability initiative that did qualify with the most signatures ever in California. It's on the ballot, but the whole election cycle is going to be an interesting one as we move out of this phase we're in. We'll keep you updated, but it sounds like, you know, people would be receptive to this, that tax portability initiative, given everything going on, and would not be supportive of the commercial adjustment to Prop 13. But there's a lot of time before any of that happens.
We may end up with fewer propositions on the ballot, I suppose, if going out and gathering signatures right now might be kind of, awkward with the lockdown going on. So normally there's quite a number of propositions on the ballot. Thank goodness we were, out there early, got it done. And so we might be one of the few measures on the ballot for people to be voting on. That might be actually a good thing for us, I would think.
That's it. This is fun. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Christine. Lots of information. Don't forget to check the Tri-County's website. Laura keeps that updated on a regular basis. You have the CAR website and the coronavirus website that CAR provides and NAR provides. Okay, next up is Mr. Giardinelli. He's the attorney for Tri-Counties, and he's going to give us an industry update. Thank you, John.
Well, good morning, everybody. Great presentation. I have to say, this is my personal opinion. I wasn't asked to say this. It's just something as most of you know, I represent a lot of boards with a lot of members. And if anyone ever wondered why you are a realtor, I think the question's been answered in the affirmative. I have to say that as part of a discussion group at NAR, working with the CAR attorneys, both organizations, and of course, Tri-Counties are all, you guys are getting your money's worth. And frankly, if you're not taking advantage of this phenomenal information that's being provided at the NAR level, at the CAR level, and at the local level, shame on you, because you're really missing out on some tremendous insight. I think in all the years I've been practicing law, I've never seen organizations respond to an emergency, frankly, in the manner that I've seen here. Having said that, I also want to point out, because Laura told us that we're recording this. So for those plaintiffs' lawyers that are sitting out there, understand that we are giving opinions today, that we're not necessarily talking about the actual law or the actual standard of care. What we are doing is providing opinions based upon what we're seeing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these are going to be the law. So having said that, I will get started. First of all, remember that real estate was added on as an essential service, and that doesn't mean that it's business as usual. So you need to be very, very careful. One of the things that we're concerned about at the lawyer group level is that, and I don't know how to say this nicely, so I'm just going to say it. There are some of the people out there who are playing games, who are trying to circumvent the MLS rules, who are trying to circumvent these rules. We saw this morning some issues relating to staging. We've seen some issues relating to people trying to play games with open houses. And of course, the MLS has been very cognizant of people trying to play games with the MLS. Don't do that, because at the end of the day, the government has the right to step in and declare the organized real estate practices as being non-essential, and that is not going to help anybody. So let's talk about some things that are going on out there. As was mentioned before, there are a number of forms that are out there. I think they're fantastic. It's very, very important that you read them and understand them. As Mary mentioned a few minutes ago, you're going to hear from Gov on Monday. There are 6 forms that are out right now today. There will be 3 more that will be released tomorrow. The 4 of the 6 forms that are out today are going to be revised tomorrow. And so you need to be aware that these forms are out there and they're for your benefit. There's a declaration. It's probably the most controversial of all the forms. It's a form that allows you to get a declaration from whoever is entering the property that they are not aware that they have any of the symptoms, that they're not ill, that they're all of those kinds of things that have been part of the news. A couple of suggestions on the use of that form, because we've seen some pushback from inspectors and others. Number one, if you're planning on using the form, put it in your MLS comments. Ed Zorn was on with Tim and Christina and I yesterday. He's the attorney for CRMLS, and he made a good point that make sure everyone understands that that form is going to be required. Send it out ahead of time. If it's a person such as an inspector who's not part of the MLS, send it to them. Let them know ahead of time that the form is out there and that some form of a declaration is going to need to be signed. If they're not willing to sign the form, that's a red flag, and you should be very, very cautious about that. I spoke with the president of the group that certifies inspectors, CREIA, and he indicated that they're not taking a position one way or the other on that form, that they're simply leaving it up to the individual inspector and or the individual inspection company. So for that reason, get that form to them ahead of time and let everyone know, including potential buyer's agents, that form is going to be required if that's what your seller has told you to do. There's a listing agreement form that I'm sure Gov will go into great detail. I love this form. Again, it's an addendum, which means you can attach it and make it part of your listing contract. But over and above that, it's also a great checklist where you can spend some time under paragraph 2 talking to your client, the seller, about your marketing strategies, the fact that you're probably going to do most of your showings, open house, and all of that. So virtually, I mean, so it's a great form. There's a notice of unforeseen coronavirus circumstances. Obviously, pretty much that's the life we've all been living recently, which is in unforeseen circumstances. And then there's actually a coronavirus addendum or amendment to the contract itself. And that is a great form that will allow you to take into account, particularly if you're already under contract and in escrow, those kinds of things that none of you anticipated before all this got started. So those are great forms. They're all going to be revised, and I don't know what the revisions are. We'll find that out tomorrow, and then Gov will bring that to your attention on Monday. It's a class well worth attending if you can. If not, I don't know if it's going to be recorded, but CAR is also going to be doing a webinar. For those of you that do, and as far as those forms are concerned, tomorrow they're going to be issuing 3 new forms for landlord tenants that also deal with the issues that are in these forms. So they'll be basically the same form, but geared towards landlord tenant related issues. Then there already are out there 2 landlord tenant forms. One is the notice to tenant of the ability to pay rent. I think it was Tim or Christine referenced before that you just don't carte blanche not pay. There's supposed to be some relationship to the inability to pay because of what has been imposed on so many people. And so there's a form the tenant can be sent so that the landlord can then open up the means of communication. And then lastly, there's a coronavirus rent payment delay and repayment agreement. That form, I love that form because it does give you the ability to negotiate with your tenant ahead of time. One overriding issue that I think is critically important right now is the fact that you don't just leave things to chance. There needs to be some conversation with your people ahead of time, more than ever before. And that leads me into another topic of conversation. Yep.
Can I ask you a question?
You can do whatever you want. This is your show.
Regarding the declaration for the to enter the property, I am a listing agent, and when the selling agent shows my listing, do I need to request a copy of the declaration form from the selling agent and his or her clients?
Yes. And the selling agent, the buyer's brokerage, as it's now called under the law, really needs to be familiar with that form. So it shouldn't be a big issue for that side of the table. You should let them know ahead of time, even as early as in your MLS comments, that you're going to require that form, because it has nothing to do with compensation. It's not a violation of any of the MLS rules to put it in there. It's a perfectly appropriate requirement, and yet you should let them know ahead of time. Look, here's the deal. Article 3 of the Code of Ethics says you're supposed to cooperate with other brokers for the benefit of your client. And I think in talking to other agents and talking to other brokers, Mary, you can certainly weigh in on this. I think it's more critical today than it's been for a very long time that agents put aside whatever games they were playing before and understand Article 3 and California law makes it very, very clear. You are supposed to cooperate, not because it's good for you, although that certainly is true. You cooperate for the benefit of those clients. And today, you need to show leadership. You need to be, the clients are looking to you as the quote unquote essential service, and you need to lead by example and so forth. So that's basically the forms. Gov's going to do a great job. He always does. So I would urge you to watch that program. It's a great member benefit. I don't know if you consider it good news or not, but as many of you were aware, there was going to be a significant modification to your purchase agreement, the RPA, in December because of all of what's going on and the uncertainties of the marketplace and the things that the good doctor talked about. CAR has decided to postpone the issuance of the new RPA from December 2020 to December 2021. And so any training that Laura had set up, I know Linda DeStefano and I were going to do a class together. All of that is no longer going to be necessary. We'll be using the RPA that you currently use for the next year and a half. And then sometime next summer, Laura will set up whatever training the board wants to do. And the new form will come out in December 2021. So don't worry about it for right now. You're good. All right, if I don't have any questions about the forms, because frankly, you're going to hear from Gov, and I'm sure he'll do a bang-up job, I want to jump into a couple of other topics. Tim, Christine, and I negotiated an ordinance with one of the cities that is not part of Tri-County's jurisdiction, but in doing so, we dealt with the issue of showing. And so I believe that issue is relevant to you because you're in Los Angeles County, number one, and number two, I thought that what we did and the leadership that these two kids showed really ended up with a good ordinance that's workable. And so let me just cover a couple of the high points. Number one, all showings wherever feasible should be by some virtual format. That's number one. You should default and talk to your seller about defaulting to a virtual format for all showings. Open houses are off the table. You know, you have all sorts of programs. I wrote them down. I don't know anything about them. Most of you know I'm not very technological, but there are services out there that can help you stage your houses for open houses, but open houses themselves are verboten. Number two, that if you have to show the house physically, it should only be to serious buyers. And serious buyers have been defined under both CAR and under the jurisdictions as people that have either made a contingent offer, contingent upon actually viewing the house, or they have pre-qualified in some manner, which, as the doctor mentioned, is going to become more difficult. And so these are not looky-loos. These are people that have a serious interest in purchasing that property. And for that reason, you can let them in if a virtual showing is not feasible. If you're going to do a virtual showing, no more than 2 people should be allowed in the house at any one time. The listing agent should work with the seller to make sure that the house is completely available, open all the doors, open the drapes, do all those kinds of things so that the buyer doesn't really have to touch anything. In this particular ordinance, and I'm not sure this is across the board, guys, I'm looking at you two, Tim and Christine, but in this particular ordinance, the buyers or potential buyers that are going to go into the house have to be residing together before they go in. In other words, they can't be unrelated. So I couldn't bring, an unrelated friend or someone else into the house. They have to be, frankly, under quarantine together now. And then they sign the declaration that they don't have any of the issues that are referenced in the declaration. And then they go in, and the agent stays outside, stays in her car, whatever needs to be done. And then the seller leaves, whether they can go to, like the boxers refer to, a neutral corner, maybe go outside, maybe attend to something that they can do somewhere else, and then they come back in and disinfect. And Christine covered a lot of those issues with gloves and masks and disinfectant and all of that. So,
John, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So a couple questions. One goes, 2 of them go back to the forms, okay?
Okay.
Is the COVID addendum being included with the RPA or after acceptance?
I don't know. Obviously, if the transaction was already under contract in an escrow when all this came about, it's not part of that contract and has to be negotiated simply because it's an addendum, which means an addition to or modification of the contract. I don't know, Mary, maybe you know, I don't know if CAR has made it part of the package that you get, like the buyer's inspection form and the AD and all that. I don't know if they're adding this as part of that package or not. I would hope they would, but that's something you could probably ask Gov on Monday. I'm not a realtor, so I don't know.
Okay, as landlord's representing agent, are we required to give tenants those forms ahead of time, even if we know they can probably pay rent on time?
Are you talking, if they're talking about, well, first of all, I'm not sure what the question is referring to. These forms are not mandated by any law that I'm aware of. Maybe Tim or Christine can weigh in on that. I'm not aware that they're required. They're just highly suggested. And I'm going to get into the concept of standard of care in a second. They just make perfect sense to me. Your tenant's got all they're in great shape right now from a standpoint of monetary concerns, because if they're keeping up on things, they know that there's nothing you're really going to be able to do to them. And probably if you're in LA County, I'm guessing maybe August or September before the courts start taking up issues of breach of contract and financial loss and evictions. I know in Riverside County, the judicial, they had an order that was issued that said they'll take up evictions right after criminal cases are caught up. And that could be August or September. They're planning on opening up again in July. Of course, as Tim mentioned, nobody really knows what the governor is thinking and what his conditions are for opening up. So my attitude is, look, if you've got tenants right now, particularly if you're managing your own property, get a hold of your tenants ahead of time. Give them the forms. Find out if they're working full time, basically, if they're a government worker or they've not been hit with any kind of a financial issue. And if they have, work with them the best you can. And yes, Christine?
Oh, so just so you're aware, for those listeners and viewers, the notice of tenant of ability to pay rent during coronavirus pandemic, so that CAR form NTAP that you discussed is an informational notice that a landlord can send to a tenant for the purpose of starting a dialogue with the tenant regarding payment of rent during the coronavirus pandemic. So CAR is really positioning it as a way to start that conversation.
Right.
Versus the coronavirus rent payment delay and repayment agreement, CAR form RPD. And that would really be something you'd want to utilize if you did get that notice from a tenant about inability to pay at this moment. So those are two forms, but again, one is the addendum to the lease agreement. One's more of an informational piece, as John mentioned.
And so I guess for want of a better term, they are icebreakers, right? You get them off to your tenants, and then you start the conversation. If you're managing multiple properties, like I know that Tim and Christina and I have someone that we know that he manages over 1,000 units, and so if you're somebody like that, if you're managing properties in bulk, then that conversation needs to take place sooner than later. Let me jump into a couple of other things. NAR is weighed in on the issue of the Code of Ethics. And why is the Code of Ethics important? Because it's your standard of behavior. And so NAR, we're going to have a meeting this afternoon with some professional standards administrators. But I would warn you that under the code, if you start playing these games, and I'm saying most of you are not, most of you are doing great. But if you're going to play games, number one, you're going to be looking at an Article 1 violation. You're going to be looking, which is putting your client's best interest first. You're going to be looking at failure to cooperate. You're going to be looking at advertising violations and so forth. So we're going to send a piece to Laura next week that she can or doesn't have to post, but it's going to talk about the Code of Ethics, which again could lead to a $15,000 fine. Another thing that you guys are going to have on, I think it's April 27th, is Jeff Smetana, who's one of the attorneys for CRMLS, is going to do a presentation on the new clear competition rule. Just be aware that with that rule, if you violate it, you're looking at a $2,500 fine potentially. So you want to be aware that that's a rule that if you're going to put a listing in immediately as an active, it doesn't change anything you're doing right now. But if you've got a coming soon or some other type of an exclusion from the MLS, you're going to need to understand those rules. They go into effect on May 1st, although they won't start enforcing them until May 4th. May 1st is a Friday, so because of the weekend and the closed offices and the questions, they're going to wait till Monday the 4th. So you've got some learning to do. As far as landlord-tenant issues, I'm not sure what questions people would have. The areas, just keep in mind the courts are they're not closed technically, but they're physically closed. They're not processing any evictions by law right now. They're probably going to be backed up pretty significantly for the foreseeable future. Some people have opined that you may be looking at the beginning of next year before your case can get heard, depending upon how old it is. And so you want to deal with the financial side of your landlord-tenant relationships as reasonably and as best as you can. And then on the other side, we've been getting a lot of questions, and I don't know if anybody has any of those questions, about physically entering a tenant's property. The tenant has that control for the most part. They don't have to allow someone in to show the property. So if you've got a tenant who's unwilling to allow his or her property to be shown during the listing period, you're pretty much going to have to honor that. If it's an issue relating to repairs, then it's a different scenario. And so I don't want to impose on your time if those issues aren't important to you. Bottom line, if you've got a tenant and you need to go see the property for any reason, you make an appointment ahead of time and you bring the declaration with you.
Can I have a couple questions?
Okay, sure.
So is it advisable to put a lockbox on a listing that is vacant?
I heard that conversation. Now, again, I'm not a realtor, so, but I've heard that question come up yesterday, and I thought that the answer that the broker gave was excellent. The lockbox should be very limited because you're limiting access to all of your properties, even vacant properties. So number one. Number two is that when a lockbox is used, you need to make sure that it's disinfected, that someone goes out, because that's been touched and you don't know if the person's touched it with you know, with gloves or without gloves, or whether they're infected or not. And then lastly, of course, I don't believe it's against any rules, Christine, Tim, to have a lockbox. I'm not aware that that's been restricted. But if you're going to put a lockbox on a property, particularly a vacant property, then I would suggest that you think through all of the other rules dealing with limitations on entry and all those kinds of issues. So I don't know if anybody has a comment about that.
And that was mentioned yesterday that people haven't seen restrictions on that, but certainly you would want to put restrictions on access to, or only those people you know in advance. Because you're going to want to know who's going to your property. You want them to sign that property disclosure agreement. You want to have certain protocol in place. No one should be accessing it without your prior knowledge of that.
Absolutely. As Norm made a really great point yesterday, that that you guys have tremendous tools that already exist at your multiple listing service. So the place to start for you, whether you're listing a property for sale or for rent at the MLS, is to put whatever conditions you want to impose in there first, and get familiar with those kinds of tools. I know that I bought a couple of properties sight unseen not too long ago, and it works. I mean, it's not something that's impossible to do. Obviously, I don't live in either of those two properties, but the reality is that it is something that can be done. Moving on to again, I'll answer.
I have one more
go ahead.
question. You mentioned physical showings only to serious buyers that have made an offer.
Correct.
Are we looking at sending letters of intent as opposed to writing an entire offer to purchase?
That's actually a great comment. I don't know that that's required. Again, when they're talking about best practices and the things that I've seen, and talking to knowledgeable people like Tim and Christine and others, is number one, is maybe they've already given you an offer. It doesn't have to be a letter of intent, although that's certainly a possibility. It's an extra step, frankly, but the offer is basically contingent on your going to the property and viewing it and making sure that it's what the virtual look-see bears out. Or, at a minimum, make sure that the people that are coming to the property are pre-qualified in some way so that they're financially capable, at least to your satisfaction, of purchasing the property. Again, we're fleshing all this out, but I suspect, and I don't know if Mary agrees, I suspect that a lot of these kinds of issues are going to survive this market, because what's wrong with, particularly if you're an owner, say like me, where I would be very concerned about opening my house up to any old body that wants to come in. I put my house on a Christmas tour one time and was not happy with the results of people traipsing through my property. So I would be very reluctant to open my house up if we decided to sell it. So I would think these kinds of practices, some of these practices actually are going to be really good, and we may see them survive this marketplace. So, all right, moving on. Again, I'm open to any kind of a discussion or any question that might come up. I know we're limited in time, so I want to just touch on one last issue. We're already seeing lawsuits filed. Walmart got sued. Some churches are filing lawsuits against the state on constitutional grounds. We don't know what the legal landscape, or for that matter, the legislative landscape, is going to look like down the road. And so let me just talk real quickly about the issue of liability. Liability is a fancy term that lay people use, and what it really means is I had a legal obligation of some sort. In your case, we're not really sure what those obligations might be, although it's starting to get clearer and clearer. I think you start with CAR's best practices. We don't know what the liability is going to be, but you have a legal duty. You then breach that duty in some manner, play a game, ignore the open house restrictions, ignore cleaning yourself up before you go in with people that are sick, whatever it might be. And that standard of care that you breached caused somebody damages. So those are the 4 elements: duty, breach, causation, damages. We don't know what duty is going to look like. We don't know how the courts are going to act, particularly as it applies to realtors who are now in a situation that you all haven't faced before. And so as a risk manager who defends real estate brokers, my attitude is you are to be more conservative. And Mary, I know you're a top quality agent and you do this anyway, but I think personally, is my opinion, that you should be more conservative than ever before and guide your clients through this process, whether you're on the listing side or whether you're on the purchase side. And just put their interest, particularly now, something you've never had to really worry about before, which is their health and safety. You've been worried in the past before about their financial condition and the motivations for selling and all that. Well, now you've got these health and safety issues that have jumped in front of everything else. And while you're not doctors, certainly, you need to be careful that you take into account and become familiar with all the things that Tim and Christine have put up on the association's website, all the different standards and the CDC rules and all that. Because if you don't, we don't know what the courts are going to do with all of this stuff. We don't know what the legislative response is going to be. I know that I've been looking at some other stuff as we've been talking, and there's a bill before the legislature, isn't it, to reduce rents by some figure 25%. I know CAR is opposing that, but who knows what they're going to do with all this. We don't know. Yesterday, Mayor Garcetti blasphemed the fact we may not have a baseball season, right? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. So for my standpoint, be cautious. Learn the forms. Attend the thing on Monday. Read what's going on. Keep in touch with the board and all of the links the board's putting up there for you. Read, read, read. I feel like I've become a glorified librarian over the last 3 weeks because we spend a lot of time reading lately and trying to figure out where we're headed. E&O insurance is going to be an issue down the road because we don't know how the insurance companies are going to respond, particularly if you're accused of doing something intentionally or grossly negligently. So just be cautious. I'm going to close it then with, I'm not going to cover these issues, but some things we're also seeing, so just be careful of. There's a couple of $1 trillion floating around that the government's going to be sending out to people over the next period of time. And so be careful of all the scams, IRS scams, SBA loan scams. Just be aware, be cautious. Be careful of fair housing issues. They're cropping up. And so be very careful that you treat everybody the same, and be very careful that we've had some Americans with disability claims, particularly as it applies to your technology. So make sure that you talk to your IT people about are you properly set up in that regard, because right now your websites and so forth is your brick and mortar, right? For the most part. And then lastly, because we're all now on this format more than ever before, and may very well be down the road, I think you need to be very, very careful of cybersecurity issues. I know that I got an email from a friend of mine. She's the attorney for the Virginia board, and she sent me a 10-point Zoom security system. So again, that's all that I have. Unless anybody has any questions. I have tons of stuff here, but I thought I would just sort of summarize all of that. But read, and be cautious.
John, this is Mary. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
If you have a tenant that was in default or hadn't paid his rent prior to March 1st, does the coronavirus rent delay apply to them?
Yeah, I believe it does, because they've stayed all evictions. And the purpose is nothing to do, well, I'm sure that they're doing what they can to help tenants because this is California. Pardon me. But I think that the real reason is they're very concerned about a spike in homelessness. And so from a policy standpoint, I think pretty much the bottom line is you'll probably be the first in when they finally open the courts back up again. But if you've got an unlawful detainer trial that's already been set, you're going to be continued. All trial dates have been vacated. If you have not issued your summons yet because you were within that 3-day period and you're getting ready to sue for unlawful detainer, you're not going to be able to get the summons issued unless you can show a health and safety reason. And of course, if you'd already gotten started, you're stayed until who knows when. Now the lift, Tim and Christine will be better able to say when all the restrictions will get lifted, but as a lawyer, I can tell you, and what I'm getting from courts in LA, Riverside, and San Bernardino County, and Orange County, is that you're not going to be first in line. They're going to do the criminal cases first under the Constitution, then they'll start with evictions. They, at least in 2 of the 4 courts, they've already said evictions will be second before they even get to any other civil cases.
Yeah, and try to work something out if possible. I know that's really tough advice to give, to say work something out with someone who's not paying, but you're likely to be stuck with this tenant for some time, and the time frame for repayment is 12 months. I think in some jurisdictions, we have to look at LA County specifically, but go back to February. They still have to document, because you're going to have to, if you want to take them to court eventually, you need that documentation. However, you know, the government reach, and we've discussed this a lot, I think it's here to stay for a while, even though we may go back to what we say, quote unquote, normal, or at least going back to business being open. Certainly there's restrictions in place that aren't going to be lifted for some time, even if we think that the pandemic is past us. It's hard to move back that government reach.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of, you know, again, depends on the state that you're in. I've had, like I said, I'm a member of a national attorney discussion group, and we're certainly going to be at the forefront of a lot of pro-tenant kinds of laws and restrictions. And a lot of this is going to get litigated in class actions and in other types of lawsuits. You know, the idea that they're going to come in and unilaterally decide to make you reduce your rent, particularly if you're barely at market to begin with, those issues are going to get litigated. Is that a taking or not? Those are going to be questions that the courts are going to be real busy dealing with, I think, after this. And of course, the legislature is going to weigh in, as only California legislature can do, and we'll see where that goes. I couldn't agree with Christine more. This is a time for you to work things out. And I did a sort of an informal survey with a couple of my boards. And in Orange County and in the Southwest Riverside portion, they're not seeing the kind of spike in delinquencies that we were afraid of, at least for the April payments. Yes, there's more, but it's not to the level that we were worried about. People are taking the, you know, they're taking the charge seriously, that if you can, go ahead and pay your rent. If you can, go ahead and pay your mortgage, and they're doing it. There's I think in Southwest Riverside County, we're looking at about a 10% spike, and in Orange County, not even that high so far. Now, maybe Brian and some of the other property managers are seeing it a little differently. I don't know, but that's what we're seeing across the board. But Christine's right. Look, this is not the time to stand on your legal rights as a landlord, because you really are standing on quicksand. Today's the time to sit down, send the forms to the client, have an adult conversation with them, be respectful, and try and work it out, particularly where you've got tenants that are sitting here waiting to find out whether they can qualify for unemployment. Some people are getting their checks now, but $1,200 probably not even going to cover the rent. And frankly, from what I understand, Christine and Tim, the unemployment claims portion of all this is pretty much crashed under the weight of all the unemployment claims. Another 5.5 million this week. So I don't know how many that is, but we've reached and probably surpassed Depression era unemployment. So thinking business as usual is not going to work for you today. You're going to get dinged. You're going to lose some money. and just try to minimize it as best you can, but be respectful.
Tim had a good statistic today that he shared with me about the 10 years and economic gains being lost in a month. He forgot already. See,
Oh, I think it was, there was a headline on the story. It was, 10 years of jobs were wiped out in 1 month.
Right.
Yeah, headline.
And hopefully if we get the economy open back up again, of course, these are political conversations that I try to stay away from because my patience is wearing thin. But if we can get the economy, at least in phases, moving forward, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to see a lot of businesses shuttered. They're never going to come back. The mom and the pops that don't qualify for any assistance, or the money's run out, and if they don't fund that business relief programs with some more money, we're going to see a lot of businesses never come back. One of the things that's going to be critical to a lot of this is going to be business interruption insurance, of course, and I don't know who's got it and who doesn't. But not everybody is rejecting these claims. So you need to take a look at your insurance policies. But bottom line is, we don't know how it's going to turn out and how long it's going to be before we come back. A lot of people are, there's a lot of political issues out there. There's a lot of practical issues out there. There's certainly health and safety issues out there. So we're not really sure. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think Tim mentioned it before. That's, I think, the thing that we're all most frustrated with. We all want dates. Is it June 1st? Is it May 15th? When? And really, I don't think we're getting that from anybody yet.
I have a question. We had a property management class last week, and there was a lot of discussion about how long tenants have to pay back their arrears rent. Is there any guidelines or anything like that for that?
I think
we
in
know
your
of?
jurisdiction, I think it's 12 months. Isn't that what they're going to do? Christine, I'm looking at you, or Tim?
County.
LA County, they
Okay.
for a year. Some counties aren't as long. The governor's order originally had 90 days from June 1st. But here in Orange County, we've seen even our bigger cities, Anaheim, Santa Ana, extend that further, 120, 100, even 80 days.
And isn't there also, like in my way of thinking, a practical a point of view? Because if I've got 3 months of rent that I have not been able to pay, and there's no program that helps the landlord deal with any of that, then and according to statistics, most people are now at least a third to a half of their income is going toward rent, based on the statistics I've seen. I think you're going to see, you're really going to need to work it out with your tenant the best way that you can, because the other side of the coin are bankruptcies. Keep in mind, these are dischargeable debts. And so if I am owed a bunch of money, yeah, I might be able to evict the tenant, but as far as getting that money back, if they're forced into a situation where their debts have mounted, I think you're going to talk to the bankruptcy lawyer in our firm, and I think you're going to see a spike in bankruptcies as well, which means you're never going to collect that money. So it's time for while you're not in a terrible bargaining position, you're not in the best bargaining position you've ever been in as a landlord or a property manager. So you need to be thinking through all of these things and not necessarily taking a real harsh approach to your tenants.
Well, I would suggest that everybody read really carefully the coronavirus rent payment delay and repayment agreement. It gives you a lot of options, and
Couldn't agree more.
So, use that. I have a question for Tim and Christine. On our president's call, Dave Walsh, our president-elect for CAR, he indicated that in the city of Oakland, they had passed an ordinance, a rule, whatever you want to call it, that if you were a victim of the coronavirus or someone in the house or in the unit was a victim of coronavirus, your rent was going to be forgiven. And they passed that. Okay. So what I'm trying to find out, that's up in Oakland. Is there anything that you see that's trickling down towards us here in Southern California?
And it may have, I don't know about Oakland, but San Jose, and I was just communicating with our counterpart in San
It might have been San Jose. I'm sorry. You're right.
Jose. Exactly. So they took this up a week ago, and I just got clarity or confirmation from our counterpart up there that the city attorney for San Jose did opine that that was unconstitutional, not legal, to just forgive rent payments entirely. And so thankfully that did not move forward. And that was a concern a couple of weeks ago of, does this have a trickle down effect? But you'll see one city or county pass something and another will follow suit. So it's good to keep our eyes and ears on everything statewide. And that's what we're here for.
There is a bill, you're seeing emails about, AB 828, that it would basically say that that's the idea that rent could get knocked down 25%. That's, I want to make sure everyone understands that that would only be available in a court if you were suffering economically from the coronavirus. You could ask a judge under the terms of this bill could reduce the rent up to 25%, but it wouldn't necessarily apply just to every property automatically out there in the state. You would still have to be in court and asking the judge to do that. Now, that bill, it's a bill, you have to get it passed by the legislature. They're not meeting. So there's just the logistics of passing legislation right now. This is not happening. So I've been talking with our counterpart with the Apartment Association, and they're of course very strongly opposing that bill. I mean, we don't think it will ultimately pass, but we want to make sure we would kill it right out of the gate right away. So that AB 828 is a bad bill. And if I could get on a soapbox for just a moment, I think our membership should understand what these sorts of ideas, when we have an emergency pop up and the government comes in and starts rewriting the terms of the landlord-tenant relationship or loans, what a very dangerous precedent that is for the future. You know, if you're a lender and you're making a 30-year loan, it's almost guaranteed in a 30-year period of time, there's going to be a war, there's going to be a pandemic, there's going to be a terrorist attack, there's going to be a recession, there's going to be bad things that happen in that 30-year period of time. And if it's made clear to any potential lender out there, a bank or something, that when we have a problem, the government's going to step in and basically hose you and rewrite the terms of your loan and basically put the screws to the lender in this case, it's going to create a real big chill going forward. And a lender, and when life gets back to normal, a lender's going to remember when the going got tough, the government came in and really screwed me over. So a lender will do the only thing they can do in the future, which is to protect themselves, which is raise their interest rates. That is how they can protect themselves when they're out on a limb for a 30-year loan. They have to build in extra cushion to that loan to try to take into account for the fact that the government comes around and screws them anytime something bad happens. So I think it's real important if we're talking to anyone, politicians or someone in government, they understand what they're doing long-term when they make these crazy policies. They make long-term home ownership very much more difficult to obtain, as they're going to really cast a black pall over lending in the future, and not just lending, but even being in the business of supplying rental housing. If the government just comes around screwing property owners, who are offering rental housing in the future, people are going to think twice about that, aren't they? And so, you're going to really kind of create a bad situation going forward. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but I think
is there room on your soapbox for another person? Because I think personally, and again, this isn't a real estate comment, but it's across the board. We're seeing probably the biggest issue, in my view, is going to be personal liberty post-COVID, because we've seen how easy it was for government to step in and probably necessarily based on health and safety concerns. But then, as Tim just brilliantly pointed out, in my view, now you're starting to see government overreach. And that to me is going to be the biggest concern. Like I mentioned, I know our law firm is filing a lawsuit with another law firm relating to churches. We represent about 200 churches. There are issues and again, in talking to my brethren in other states, where issues are coming up all the time relative to, the right to associate, the right to get together, and whether the government, while there may have been an emergency and maybe still is an emergency, at what point do these things become permanent, and what harm have you done to the basic essence of this country? And those are really some big issues. And that's why when Tim or Christine ask you to respond to a red alert or something like that right now, do it, because they don't take those things lightly. And if somebody, and again, I'm going to speak for Tim and Christine in a second, because I know you guys are such good kids. If you've got a few extra bucks and you want to know where to put it with your political action fund right now, because these are going to be huge issues on a go forward basis, in my opinion. And I think more than ever, because you can't do it by yourself, you're just one voice. But if you've got the voice of a couple of 100,000 realtors with you to deal with some of these issues, I think more than ever, you're going to need to be aware, not Democrat, not Republican, not conservative, not liberal, but just be aware that these are going to come up and they're not going to go away. We don't know what it's going to look like post-COVID. And as a lawyer, I'm obviously concerned about liability issues and getting into court and all those kinds of things. But Christine and Tim have to deal with a lot of these big ticket issues for a very long time, I think.
This is Mary, and just to piggyback on what the three of you have just said, I think everybody needs to remember that lending, basically in very simple terms, it's all about risk. It's all about risk for the investor. And lending is a very strong component to our ability to be able to sell homes and for our borrowers to be able to buy them. So what's going to happen if we have this overreach by the government, like we did with Dodd-Frank, if you guys can remember that one? What happens is that it becomes more restrictive and it becomes more difficult for the borrowers to borrow. Like the FICO scores are going to edge up. Right now we're having an issue because of the mortgage forbearance, that they said, okay, everybody, don't make your payments. But they didn't talk to the investors and the servicers. The servicers have to make those payments regardless if they collect the mortgage payments or not. So what happens, the servicers have a certain amount of money in reserve. Now that reserve is depleted. Now the investors call their margin. And now we end up with a worse mess than we did in 2008. And that's something that everybody has to be, it's nice to ask and expect everybody to pay for this and pay for that and give it to me and give it to me. But we have to look at the whole picture, how it's going to impact our industry and people's ability to be able to borrow. Because the depression wasn't just because of the stock market crash. The depression in 1929 was a result of not having credit available to people to borrow money. So I got on my little soapbox. Everybody has to be really careful. And in that vein, I wanted to add is that CAR is probably one of the largest association that fights for property rights. We are a major consumer advocate. And I understand where they're coming from as far as the tenants, but everybody continues to forget about the property owner. Just because you own property doesn't mean that they're independently wealthy. People invest in real estate because they see it as a sound investment and it's part of their future, their retirement, their kids' college education. So when they put the burden of housing on the property owners for the tenants, it creates an imbalance. And we need to be able to fight that in a way that we're not throwing tenants out into the street, but they need to understand that they have to protect the property owners for this to continue. Otherwise, your investors who own property, they're going to sell it and you're not going to have any rental property left over. And with that being said, I give it back to John. Are you done?
Oh, I've been, is that what you mean by done? I'm a lawyer, so I always have something to say.
Wasn't it?
But, you know, I just saw Josie made a comment about, you know, we're seeing lenders getting more restrictive, which I can understand that, but again, the affordability index was already getting pretty shallow in terms of the number of buyers that were out there able to afford the houses that were available at the prices that they're being offered at. And so if you start shrinking the market even further, while you're going to end up again post-COVID, I guess I'm an optimistic guy, probably because I'm going stir crazy, particularly now that the weather's nice. But you know, this is going to be over at some point in some way, and then we're going to have to deal with the residual impact on the economy and so forth, on our freedoms. And so one of those issues is going to be the housing market and the availability of housing at a price that people can afford. So I agree with all of you. So Tim, I hope you got a permit for that soapbox. Otherwise, it's an unpermitted structure. But one last thing, and then unless there's a question pending, I got a call from a buyer's agent saying that the seller, even though the contract is pretty clear, the seller wouldn't let her in to do her avid inspection. I don't know, Mary, if you've had that issue come up in your practice. So a couple of tips. Number one, you've got to document your avid form to indicate, number one, that you were not allowed accessibility if it's absolutely clear you weren't. And then there's a couple of tips. Number one, go back to whatever is on in the virtual world and do your tour as best as you can through that. And of course, if you've already been in the property, use your notes or your best recollection, and then make sure that in the avid form that you provide to your buyer, who was your client, they are crystal clear that you were not able to enter that property, and that you might want to argue or at least talk about extending the contingency regarding the approval of the condition of the house for a later period so that you can get in to see if there's anything. But a lot of people are doing pre-inspections, as somebody mentioned before, and things of that nature. So anyway, that's kind of where we seem to be with those issues. Just everything is coming up, all sorts of really cool stuff. So if there's any other questions, I'll answer them.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. A couple of people raised their hands, so I'm going to unmute or try to here. Mohammed. Let me see if I can unmute him. It's not letting me unmute him. Maybe the two people that raised their hand, they can type their question in the Q&A.
If someone has a concern about Tim's soapbox, I didn't authorize it, for the record.
I do have a question. It's an MLS question, and I know none of us are with the MLS, but in conversations that you've had in the last couple of days, have they talked about adding room dimensions to the listing info at all?
I don't know. Nobody asked a question. I've not had a question posed to me or not heard a question posed to either Ed or Art. So I don't know.
Okay.
It's a great question to ask on the 27th, however.
Yes.
Josie just typed in that she sits on the rules committee and they are not discussing it.
So as far as I know, they're pretty busy right now with clear cooperation. So I think that's going to take up a lot of their time, not just finalizing things, getting the word out, but also once it goes live, implementing the enforcement of it. I have a funny feeling that's going to just take up a lot of their time talking to Ed.
Well, I think that's about it.
Okay.
we don't have any more questions.
Um,
I see something from a Jenny.
Yeah, here's one. I'm the listing agent. We are ready to accept a cash offer. Should I let? And I think that's it. It just stopped. I don't know.
Should I let what? Should it finish?
Should I let them sign the new 30-day coronavirus form?
Well, again, I don't know the situation with her deal, but again, one of the things that in talking to a lot of the brokers that I've talked to, people like Mary, is your contract has pre-printed default time elements. 7 days, 17 days, this, that, all that. You got to rethink that. A lot of people are starting to actually insert days that they think is more practical. So number one, think through the days it's going to take to do whatever it is. Mary already referenced that it's going to be more difficult to deal with some of the lenders. And an all cash offer, are you going to be able to get verification of funds and all of those kinds of cool things? And then take a look at the addendum, because there could be issues that simply because of unforeseen circumstances will crop up even in an all cash offer.
Okay, John, I got a question from you. This is from Brian. Is there any recourse for buyers when those sellers won't allow entry for AVID? Should the buyers find damage to the property after sellers vacate and buyers are able to finally move in, assuming they cannot get access before or during the transaction, and if walkthrough inspections before COE?
That comes up actually even before COVID, where there's undisclosed. Obviously, any seller that will not allow access is in breach of the contract technically, and so the buyer would have a right to cancel and get their deposit back, or extend so that these inspections can be done. But if the seller is refusing to allow all entry, inspectors, whatever it might be, and the buyer goes ahead and closes, we're going to have a contract issue post-close. And that is, the contract language says, once you've removed all your contingencies, you're accepting the property in the condition that it's in, and are assuming any and all liability. Whether that will be true after all this is said and done on the kinds of situations that Brian just described, I don't know. I think it's foolish that this is a situation where someone like Mary and someone like Brian, representing both sides of the transaction, should sit down and say, look, why is the seller being unwilling to allow people in? Well, they have an incredible fear of getting sick. Okay, that's not unreasonable in today's world. How can we resolve it? Can we resolve it with an inspection? Can we resolve it where an inspector comes in, signs the declaration? How do we try and resolve the problem? If the problem is unresolvable, then you go back to basic contract principles, which are cancellation, extension, modification, those kinds of things.
Great.
Use your heads, kids. Don't play games. You're
And
just
then
going to make
Tim-
people like me very, very successful down the road. Lawyers are sitting out there with nothing to do right now, especially the litigators, and they're going to need work. So don't be stupid.
Okay, I got a couple questions now for Tim and Christine. The one's from Larry. The COVID 3-page notice is that going to be is that part of the resources that's on the Tri-County's website?
Not at the moment, because LA County just passed this on Tuesday evening. We're still trying, or maybe at the end of, I've lost track of time. They passed Tuesday evening something, and then, or Tuesday afternoon, and last week they issued this new revised order. We're still getting clarity from the county as it relates to their noticing, but in the meantime, you can just pull that up from the order and we'll get that linked up on the website as soon as possible.
Okay, and then there's two questions. One, AB 828 hasn't passed yet.
No, Tim mentioned, that was, if you go on it online to the legislature homepage, you pull up the bill, it still is a human trafficking bill that the author had created, and basically what they call a gut and amend. So basically last month, he took a bill that was specific to human trafficking, anti-human trafficking, of course, and now turned that into a rent bill based on the current situation we're in. As Tim mentioned, the legislature is not likely to meet anytime soon, and we don't have a date set on that. They can go through committee work, but it still need to go through the whole legislature for a vote, and we just don't see that happening anytime soon.
And to steal John's line, I'm not a lawyer, but talking with the Apartment Association, my counterpart there, they feel very strongly this would be an unconstitutional law to pass. You can't just have the government go out and unilaterally force rents down. It would be probably, argued that it's a taking and it's an unconstitutional thing. But hopefully we don't have to get it to that point. So I know that bill's out there and it's, scaring everyone to death. But I don't think it's likely to pass. And the truth be told, a lot of politicians introduce bills they probably know are not going to actually get passed, but they want to say that they were trying, that they were fighting for renters or whatever. So who knows how serious to take that bill, but it is out there. We should take it seriously. But without them being in session, it's not likely to be passed, I don't think.
70-something% of the voters in San Francisco where that person is from are tenants. And I don't want to be cynical, but I think you're probably right. I'm assuming that the bill does not contain any language about reducing the landlord's mortgage by 25%.
No.
And then, Tim, can you give us a status on the CAR tax portability process?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got the thank goodness we were out early on this before the world came crashing down, but we've got enough signatures. They've been submitted, so it will be on the November ballot. The tax portability initiative that, if you don't recall, Prop 5 was our effort 2 years ago that unfortunately failed, but to basically make it easier to move along your Prop 13 tax basis from one property if you sell it and move it to the next property. Of course, right now you can still do that under Prop 60 and Prop 90. We want to make it even easier to do. We ran into opposition last time from some of the unions. I think specifically the firefighters union is the most actively opposed. So it has been modified in some ways to bring in some revenue under inherited property. If you inherit property, and anyway, so there'll be revenues in there. We think we've got the unions will back away from their opposition. So I think we can be cautiously optimistic. We can get this passed this time and get it out there. But as far as, we're not having our CAR meeting, so it's kind of hard to get that update.
Yeah, and to remember, Prop 6090, we benefit from that here, but only 11 of the 58 counties in California currently have that in place. And so expanding that to all 58 counties was a push initially, and we didn't do a lot of education last time around because of rent control issues and the like. But we're focused on it this fall, and we'll give you more information as we get through this current state we're in.
Okay, I have another question for the government affairs team. Where does CAR and Tri-County stand in the effort to carve out the commercial properties from Prop 13?
Yeah. So that's what you'll hear it called split roll property tax. So right now, all real estate, when you buy the property, it kind of locks in that what you're going to pay on property tax, and it just can grow at most 2% a year in assessed value going forward. The effort's been around for a long time, and it's going to be back again this year to eliminate that Prop 13 protection for commercial real estate, so that it would just get reassessed to the market rate every 3 years automatically. And presumably over the long term, you would see property tax really increased quite a bit for commercial real estate. It's the CAR position to oppose that. It would very much, kind of distort the market out there between residential property and commercial property. The government would be collecting a lot more revenue from property tax off of commercial real estate should there be a split roll. So it would really disincentivize, local government from ever zoning property to be residential, because they know that they're going to be able to get more for commercial property. So we oppose it. We will strongly oppose it. This is where your contributions to the Realtor Action Fund can be used to oppose these kinds of bad ideas like that, and support good ideas like our tax portability initiative. So that's.
And it was polling not great to begin with, but after this, I can't imagine voters would be in support of it, because you're already burdening small businesses that are laying off people. So it's, again, we're going into a new fall election cycle that will be drastically different in how people perceive things. So we'll keep you updated as we move forward. But those, I think, are at the back of people's minds at the moment.
It is an interesting question, though. When we come out of this, obviously, I'm sure we'll be in an economic recession. Revenues to the government will be, bad, and maybe there will be cuts to schools and stuff like that. So maybe the teachers union can make an argument. They're the ones who've been supporting the split roll, obviously. So if they can make an argument, hey, this will keep cuts from schools from happening, maybe that would be a way that they would try to sell it. So we have to be vigilant on it as well.
If you're a tenant and you're in a triple net basis, keep in mind that that you're going to be paying that increase as part of your increased rent automatically, because you're the one that's required under your lease. So even if you don't own the property, you're still going to be affected. If you're on a gross lease of some sort, then the landlord is going to try and figure out how to pass that to you in some other manner. So be aware that it's, and then of course, if you're a consumer of goods and the cost of the retailer goes up, well, who's he going to pass those costs on to? The consumer themselves. So it's just another hidden way to get the government more money. And I agree with Tim, the government's going to be hurting. They're going to be looking for revenue. They were hurting before, but they're really going to be hurting now. So,
well, the other comment I make, that Tim, I think we should make sure everybody pays attention, because remember Prop 5, how it was worded on the ballot, that it was very misleading, and so that it gave people the wrong impression, and that's something to be leery of as well.
right.
Yeah, and the tweaks I was mentioning that will bring in revenue, the Attorney General gets to write that summary above a proposition. And the last time it was a disaster. It talked about this will cause, schools to be starved of money and this and that. But there's no way they can write it now that it's hurting revenues to the government. So hopefully we'll have a much better summary written above it when the voters open their voter guide to read that. So that's why we're a lot more optimistic, I think, about our chances this year.
Okay. I think that's it. There's no more questions.
Yay.
Well, with that being said, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank our members that attended. Thank you for your continued support. And just a reminder, I know this is a difficult time, but support your political action fund, because it can make a big difference in the survival of our industry. And, not asking for a whole bunch, $5, $10, $20, it adds up when you multiply it by the numbers of our members. And don't be afraid to ask your neighbors to chip in.
I'd like to remind everybody that we have that CAR Tri-Counties webinar on Monday. I believe it's at 11 a.m. and we have Gov Hutchinson, who's going to talk about what's happening, and we have Jordan Levine, who's going to give us an economic forecast, and his economic forecast is very localized, so it's going to be a lot of really great information. And then Sarah MLS is going to have their Clear Cooperation Policy webinar on Monday, April 27th at 2 p.m. Those are all on the website. We have the resource guide on the website that we've done up, and a lot of good information on the front page of the website. So please, check out the website and you'll find a lot of great information.
I think our meeting is coming to an end. So everybody stay safe and stay well. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for everything.
Thanks, kids.
Thank you. Bye.